The weather this winter has been brutally cold and windy, so why not stay indoors with some hearty chili? The 5th annual Chili Cook-Off is happening at Sonny's Pizza on February 23rd. Attendees will get to sample over 10 varieties of chili, all from local Georgia Avenue small businesses. RSVP for free or grab a VIP pass, which includes early entry, guaranteed chili tastings, and other perks. Again, that's the 5th annual Chili Cook-Off at Sonny's Pizza. That's in Columbia Heights on Georgia Avenue between Irving and Kenyon, and it's on February 23rd.
Today on CityCast DC. Yesterday, DC Council took the unprecedented step of expelling Ward 8 Councilmember Trayon White. They literally have never kicked someone off the council before. And watching the hearing was a little weird, to be honest. 3 council members gave statements, and then, bam, there was a call for a vote and a chorus of ayes. And that was pretty much it.
On the resolution as amended, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously, and the resolution is approved.
The whole thing took less than 20 minutes. NBC's Mark Seagraves was there, and he explains what it means for Ward 8 and the city at large. Today's Wednesday, February 5th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. So, Mark, thanks for being here as always. I know we're catching you on a bit of a tight timeline, so thanks for being here. DC Council has voted to expel Trayon White. Like, what does this mean? Does that mean he's out of the building immediately, like they're escorting him out?
Well, he was not escorted out, but yes, he is immediately no longer a member of the DC Council. He had to turn in his keys, his ID, his DC Council cell phone. When last we saw him, he was walking back into his office, perhaps for the last time, to do just that. But as of right now, there are only 12 members of the DC Council.
Wow. So what happens next? Like, do you think we're going to see a special election?
Oh, we will definitely, by law, see a special election. So what happens now is the DC Council will transmit today what they did, the expulsion and the fact that there's a vacancy. The DC Board of Elections will declare a vacancy in the Ward 8 seat. They could do that as early as today or tomorrow. Within 7 days of making that declaration, the Board of Elections will issue petitions for candidates who want to be on the ballot for a special election. They'll have to circulate petitions, get a specific number of signatures of registered Ward 8 voters to get their names to appear on the ballot. That special election by law has to be held within 70 to 174 days of declaring the vacancy. So you're looking at roughly between 2 to 6 months. So you're looking at sometime this summer, we can expect to have that special election. And the winner of that special election will be sworn in as the Ward 8 council member.
Do we have any clues into who that person might be or who is planning on running?
Well, it might be Trayon White. His attorneys have made that point to council members before they took this vote, and so have his supporters. That look, former council member White was reelected in November with tens of thousands of votes by Ward 8 residents who probably knew, or at least could have known, about the allegations and bribery charge against him, and they still reelected him to the DC Council, and so. There's the argument is being made that the DC council members are overturning the will of these Ward 8 voters who knowingly sent him back to office. And so he could very well, as the law stands today, run in that special election. And as of today, you would have to look at him as the odds-on favorite to win that special election and get sworn back in.
So it's fair to say that this probably is not the end of his political career here in DC, right?
Well, it's certainly not the last we've heard of Trayon White one way or another. Whether it's the end of his political career, we'll have to see, because there is the possibility that the DC Council could consider and then vote on legislation that would prevent him from running in that special election. I asked Chairman Mendelson about that today. He told me he refused to speculate on a hypothetical. I asked him, when will you discuss that possibility? And he said, well, when it becomes more of a reality, to which I said, it kind of seems like a reality as we stand here today. For the first time in the history of the DC government, in the history of home rule, the DC Council voted to expel one of its own members. I mean, that didn't happen to Marion Barry. That didn't happen to Jack Evans, Kwame Brown, Harry Thomas, Michael Brown, any of the council members who got in trouble during their career, some of whom were indicted and went to prison. None of them had to be expelled like what we saw today with former Councilmember Trayon White.
So when is White's federal trial happening again?
So that was pushed back until January of 2026. It was first scheduled to begin in this year, in 2025. But the last time he was in federal court, former Councilmember White informed the court that he was changing attorneys, that he could no longer afford his attorneys that were representing him on the federal charges, and that he needed to get the help of public defender's office. So the public defender's office is now representing Trayon White in those federal charges. When they took over his attorneys, they did what every attorney taking over a case midstream does. They asked for a continuance, and the judge granted it. So that has been continued to January of 2026. Two notable things about that. One, it's unclear how he qualifies, given the amount of money he makes as a DC council member, how he qualifies for the public defender's office. Also, while he got rid of his private attorneys for the federal charges, he kept his private attorney, Fred Cook, to represent him before the DC Council. So it's a little unclear how he qualifies for the public defender service, but that did get him this delay to January 26th. Now, the other wild card we have is the Trump administration. We have a brand new interim U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, Ed Martin. He has not held a public press conference. He has not talked to the press. I know he has met with Mayor Bowser. He has met with the chief of police, Pamela Smith, but we don't know where he stands on the prosecution of Trayon White. We know how he stands on the prosecution of the January 6th defendants, and we know how he stands on the prosecution of President Trump. So what we're waiting to find out if he will continue this prosecution against Trayon White. He could very well come in and look at the case and decide not to pursue it. He could very well fire the prosecutors who were handling that case because maybe they had something to do with J6, but then want to continue it with new attorneys who might want another continuance. So his trial is a long way away and may not even get started in January, but that's what it's scheduled for right now.
How did Trayon White react to all of this today?
Stoic. He did not say a word. He began the day in the hallway with about 24 supporters in a prayer circle. He then went inside. He sat in the audience, not on the dais. Originally, this motion, this resolution was scheduled for the very last item on the legislative session. And we all asked, are you going to make Councilmember White sit on the dais and vote on things like RFK and other legislation all day long, only to fire him at the end of the day? That was the parliamentary procedure they were going to follow. But at the last minute this morning, Chairman Mendelson moved it up to the very first item. So Councilmember White sat in the audience, not on the dais, sat next to his attorney, Fred Cook. When they called the roll of the council before the hearing started, when they called Trayon White's name, he stood in the audience and responded present. It's the only thing he said all day long. There were only 3 council members who spoke. Normally on any vote, I don't care what it is, anytime they vote, every council member is going to make some kind of a statement to support which way they are voting. On this, only Chairman Mendelson, Kenya McDuffie, who is the chairman of the ad hoc committee, and then Brooke Pinto took an opportunity to speak. And I believe Brooke Pinto spoke because she mentioned is because when she came on the council, she came on in the aftermath of Jack Evans nearly being expelled from the council for ethics violations. And she came in kind of on this platform of accountability, transparency, and honesty in government. And so she felt she needed to make that point before her vote. But the other members, none of them said a word, and they did not do a voice vote. They did not do a roll call vote. So none of them are on the record. It was just a unanimous voice vote by the council. And so when Councilmember White left the chamber, as you can imagine, he was surrounded by reporters and TV cameras and microphones and his attorney and his staff. We followed him down the stairs to his office. He did not answer any of our questions about what he wants to say to the public, his staff, the council members, whether he'd run in the special election. He just remained completely silent and walked into his office perhaps for the very last time.
Wow, that seems like a moment of real gravitas after so much back and forth on this.
It was a historic moment. I sat in that hallway today with Tom Sherwood, the esteemed reporter and my good friend and former colleague, and talking about all the moments like this that we have had in this building, when Kwame Brown famously walked out after being indicted, the baseball vote that went south at midnight, and Tony Williams, then mayor, running from the council chamber, being chased by reporters. So many of these pivotal moments over the decades of covering Washington, D.C., and this is absolutely one of them. And again, never before has the D.C. Council voted to expel one of its own members.
Are you a forward thinker? Then you need an HR and finance platform that thinks like you do. Workday is the AI platform that helps propel your organization, your workforce, and your industry into the future. Workday, moving business forever forward.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
It's this whole thing seems like it was kind of inevitable after that December hearing where literally every single council member voted to recommend that White be expelled. Why did he not just resign then and save everybody the trouble?
So that's exactly what Jack Evans did when he faced this exact same scenario. When the committee voted to expel Jack Evans before they could get to the full council vote, former council member Evans saved them the trouble and resigned. He handled it much differently in every respect than Councilmember White handled it. Councilmember Evans at the time cooperated with the council's investigation, testified before them in private, and gave his side of the story. Former Councilmember Trayon White had 4 opportunities, as Councilmember McDuffie pointed out, to give his side of the story, to give his defense before taking this vote. And each time he declined to do so. So it played out differently than it's ever played out before. The only wild card in this whole scenario was when they took the original vote back in December. Vincent Gray was the Ward 7 council member, and he had stopped voting by this time. So you had one council member who did not vote at that time. So you actually had 11 council members vote to recommend expulsion. By the time we got to this vote, Wendell Felder is now the Ward 7 council member sitting in that seat. And I had asked Councilmember Felder the day he was sworn in how he would vote today. He said he didn't know. He told me that it had happened in council period 25, and he's part of council period 26, and it hadn't impacted the residents of his ward. And so he wasn't certain how he was going to vote. And even this morning, as he left the council breakfast, my colleague again, Tom Sherwood, asked Councilmember Felder how he was going to vote. And just an hour before the vote, he told Tom Sherwood he was still making up his mind, that he hadn't decided. They needed 11 votes in order to expel him of the 12 council members. So Felder being the wild card, if he had voted to support Councilmember White, and if Councilmember White had been able to get just one more council member to go his way, the vote would have failed. In the end, that was not the case. All 12 members, including Wendell Felder, voted to expel Councilmember White this morning.
Were there any last-ditch efforts to stop all of this?
So there was an effort, or I guess you could say there is an effort. There are some Ward 8 residents who went to court to try to block this. And basically their argument is that it is overruling the will of the voters, of the Ward 8 voters, who, as I mentioned before, knowingly went to the polls and voted to reelect him, even though he was facing this federal bribery charge, and that Councilmember White was not getting due process. Chairman Mendelson and Councilmember McDuffie addressed those concerns from the dais today, saying, in fact, Councilmember White has gotten all the due process anyone is entitled to, both with the council that has a lower threshold than a criminal court, but that he will also have his day in court to prove himself innocent there. And so they disputed those assertions in the lawsuit and went ahead with the vote today.
I want to talk more about that because I know that council members McDuffie and Pinto both talked about how important it was to do this for Ward 8 residents, even though some very outspoken Ward 8 residents have really expressed anger at this investigation. They say that it is disenfranchising them, that it was the will of the people to have him in an elected office, and that this undoes that will. What does his expulsion really mean for Ward 8's representation in the council?
Well, look, this is not the first time a ward has not been represented. Again, we go back to Councilmember Gray. With his health, he stopped voting late in his term. And so, there have been times when there have been vacancies on the council. As far as the constituent services side of this, how do I get my trash picked up? What do I do about a pothole? I got a problem with my school or crime. Councilmember White's staff will still be in the office answering phones. There are 4 at-large council members, including McDuffie and the chairman, who you can call and ask for help if you're a Ward 8 resident. Quite frankly, a Ward 8 any resident can call any council member, quite frankly, and ask for help if they've got an issue. But you tend to lean on your ward representative for things like this. So the residents of Ward 8 will still have the ability to call the DC Council and get help with kind of the quality of life issues that are typical day-to-day issues for a ward council member. They won't have a vote for right now. I will say this. There has not been a mass turnout of support for the council member at any of these events. Today, it was only about 24 people out of tens of thousands of Ward 8 residents. So he only had a few dozen supporters, and they were primarily the same very vocal supporters who had been by his side through this whole thing. So we'll really know when we get to the special election. If we get some legitimate candidates who throw their name in the ring, remember last time when his reelection came up and we knew about this, there was no real momentum to run against him in the election back in November. We'll have to see if that holds true. If any candidates do step up, put their name on the ballot and run an organized campaign. And we'll have to see if the council makes any moves to try to block Trayon White from appearing on that ballot. So, there's a lot more to go in that respect. The other wild card here that I would throw into the mix is President Trump and the Republicans. President Trump vowed on the campaign trail to take control of the District of Columbia government away from Mayor Bowser, to take control of public safety in the city. He said, some really outlandish things about the city and about its leaders, particularly the mayor. And the council and the mayor has even acknowledged this. They are very cautious about anything they say or do that could be taken by Republicans as an attack on the Trump administration or somehow making the city government look inefficient, incapable, or in this case, corrupt. So by kicking off Trayon White, they are also sending a message to Republicans in Congress and the White House that they're cleaning up after themselves. They don't have a tolerance for corruption as they see it, because they do not want to give the Republicans any excuse to come into Washington, D.C. and reinstate the control board and overturn home rule.
Well, I wonder, given all that, do you think that his being expelled is actually a sign of democracy working as it should? Or our democracy in DC kind of struggling? You mentioned Jack Evans. He was almost expelled, but he resigned first. So DC Council has never really done this before. Is this a sign that DC government is working the way it should, or that something is amiss?
Well, I guess I would say it's both. Something is amiss if you have a council member accused of taking bribes and, facing a federal indictment. But this is the system that's in place to deal with something like that. And the system played out in the timeline and in the manner of due process that is accounted for in DC law. So, whether you agree with the outcome or not, I think it is showing that the DC Council and the DC government is working according to the DC law and affording themselves of self-governance. They could have voted him off the council last year in December, right? When they first voted recommending to expel him. But they knew he would be sworn in again in January anyway. So they just wanted to get past that date, have him sworn in on this new term, and then expel him just the one time.
Well, Mark, we look forward to having you back to discuss what's next. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Bridget, thanks for having me. I'm always happy to join y'all.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey DC. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.